Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Evil Season 4, Episode 11. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I like how they're doing the titles now. Like, sadly, we're not getting the book opening anymore. It feels very, like, classic horror. I don't know if that'd even be the appropriation, but it seems like having seen the titles of what is the next this episode, everything from 11 to 14, it's like fear of. So I guess we can almost look at these final 4 episodes as kind of like this like epilogue to the series in a lot of ways, like a 4-part epilogue in a way. So I think that's kind of interesting. But obviously we're picking up in the aftermath of, Cheryl's death. She was cremated, and now it's like, went through all the funeral processes and stuff like that. It's kind of like a kind of celebration of Cheryl at their house. And it's like, yeah, most of the people there are people like that. They're people that Kristen doesn't know. And it's like, yeah, she meets someone named Ellie. And it's like, oh yeah, like Cheryl used to babysit me. When they were first talking, I was like, oh, it seems like Kristen and Ellie are besties. Like, oh, because like, the only because she even had a comment about like, oh yeah, I have like very few female friends. I was like, yeah, I think the last female friend we ever really saw you have was like that. There was one other person. Well, we know the friend that showed up earlier this season when she was in Rome with Ben and David. The one who was kind of looking after the kids for a little bit, like that good friend of hers. But there was also like her cop friend. And so she even comments on like, oh yeah, I used to have a lot of female friends and I kind of don't, and kind of wonder where that happened. But I was thinking like, oh, there was something between her and Ellie. But it's like, no, apparently, I guess the combination of, well, being surrounded by people you don't really know, plus getting a little sauced is going to make you just kind of buddy up with someone. I mean, you're in a very fragile state. She's trying to hold it together. Because even her kids are like, yeah, why is no one like crying here? And it's like they're all kind of like partying and having fun. I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing. It's meant to be like a celebration of sorts. But they were like, yeah, they were crying at the funeral, and it's like, no, they were quiet. That's at the memorial or whatever. It's like that's when they were quiet but not crying. I think it was Laura that was like, I want people crying at my funeral and stuff like that. No, there's like, yeah. So that I wasn't sure where this was going to go. I was like, okay, things are taking interesting turns. Ellie staying around, her talking to Laura initially by herself. I was like, oh, this weird. This feels weird. It feels like this might be like Leland's in prison, which we'll get to. I'm gonna save Leland stuff for a separate thing. I'm gonna focus on like everything with Kristen and her family and the aftermath of all of this. But I thought it was so interesting because I'm like, I thought like, are you I mean, just because Leland's out of the picture doesn't mean the whole DF thing isn't still doing its thing, operating without its leader. So I was thinking maybe like, okay, so maybe she's kind of acting on her own. Like, what is she doing? And she's telling Laura like, oh yeah, like my mom told me like not to get, like my mom or whatever told me to get a real job, so I gave up kind of going to art. It's like, oh, you should go to art school. And she's like, college? I'm 11 years old. And it's like, it's not too early to think about this stuff. I was like, okay, this is interesting. And so that's all playing out. It's all doing its thing. And then later on, she's talking to Kristen, and the way she started talking, I was like, what? She's like, oh yeah, like you're gonna find out Andy's cheating on you, which we found out in this episode because Kurt went to drop off the flash drive and ended up seeing Andy. Like, I thought it was weird because I was like, Andy's like wearing I was like, that's weird, why are you wearing a mask? I was like, I guess getting you some clinical strange. That's interesting. I'm also gonna know, like, do correct me, like, because the whole thing Leland was holding against her too about like all the stuff that Kristen's done, I was like, she cheated on Andy before, didn't she? But I guess it's like, well, we also don't know how long him and said person were hooking up, but I think it was like, well, it's an indiscretion. It's like, but I think, to be fair, she wasn't really in her right mind at the time, because I think that was down that spiral, like that they were like making her more and more evil, and she was kind of like, I think that was like that might. Maybe that was season 3. I don't remember. It might have actually been season 2. I'm a lot of that's blurring together. But either way. So Kurt knows about it, and he didn't know how to really broach it to Kristen, so he kind of didn't say anything, which is effed up because it's like, well, you are her therapist, but you're also like a friend and colleague. So it's like that line is kind of still bro code. I don't mean bro code in the regards of him and Andy. It's like he has a more intimate relationship. Not intimate is probably the wrong word, but he has a closer relationship with Kristen. That's what I mean, the bro code thing of like, yeah, you should have been like, yo, your husband's cheating on you. I literally walked on him having sex with someone else. But either way, this woman brings that up, and it's like, oh yeah, David's going to leave the church in 6 months for you. I'm like, what? And the moment she's saying all this stuff, because she had brought up the particle accelerator, and it's like, oh yeah, a whole bunch of black holes and stuff like that, wormholes and stuff are going. I'm like, what? And a couple seconds before she said anything, I was like, oh my god, she's Laura from the future, because she specifically stopped. Like, she didn't talk to any of the other siblings. She specifically talked to Laura and was like, yo, Laura, you should go to college and don't let your parents tell you not to follow your passions of art. I was like, what? I was like, no way. And she revealed herself. And then she's like, yo, Lynn is going to break your heart. And she's going to become a nun, but she's going to be the happiest of your children. Lila is going to be like married to a woman and yada, yada, yada. And I did think it was interesting. Like, it's fascinating. The one sibling she didn't talk about was Lexi. She didn't get a chance to, but I was like, what's going on here? Because she did specifically say like, oh yeah, Cheryl babysitted me when I was like 8 years old. And I was like, oh, okay. So I loved a lot of that. And it's like, okay. And initially, she's thinking like, all right, this lady's crazy. What am I talking about? That's just crazy. But then ultimately, I forgot what was the instigator that made her want to talk to. Well, she had the nightmare. Was that before or after? She had like, the demon came to her again, and it was whispering all that. Oh, first and foremost, it pulled up the big bad wolf from It pulled a Red Riding Hood and dressed it instead of. Well, in a way, it's like, oh, dressed as Grandma Cheryl. So I knew like the moment was from behind. I was like, it's not Cheryl, and it's like, yeah, it's a demon dressed in a wig and to look like Cheryl from behind, but it's messing with her, and it's like, oh yeah, like saying all the stuff about Andy. I can't. That's why I'm like, I'm so sorry, because it's been a couple hours since I saw the episode. I wish I could have. Some stuff came up, so it's not important. So I didn't get on this immediately. I wish I did, because now it's like slipping from my mind about what the sequence of events. But I did, because I know she got visited by the demon twice. So I think that was the first time, and then afterwards, that's what spooked her into going like, all right, let me check in on Andy. And like, Andy self-reported himself because he assumed Kurt, because he knows Kurt is close to Kristen. He thought Kurt was going to tell Kristen, and he didn't. So he kind of self-reported, which she already had suspicions. So it's interesting you accidentally self-reported, even though Kurt didn't report on you, but it's kind of your future daughter did. So that was a whole thing. And she finds out about it and immediately tears ass to the facility. And he's like, yo, I didn't want this to happen. It's the lady across. He's like, it's better for me to be with someone who's mentally ill. Like, I'm mentally unstable. I should be with someone that's mentally unstable too. And it's kind of like, wait, that's okay? You're literally going to throw like all that we have. And I love that if you do look in the background, like Andy comments on it later, but you see immediately that black dude looking from his room turning almost like, come on, look at this shit. Like, this couple's over here fighting. Like, probably, I could guarantee the words out of his mouth is like, yo, look at these white people. Look at this white couple fighting. Guarantee some shit like that came out of his mouth. But yeah, like, I love just like how like just staring straight at him, and she just went by like the dress or whatever and just knocked every damn thing off. It's like, understandable. Once again, I do believe she cheated on him first, but it's like, hey, I don't care. I mean, once again, I feel bad for Andy, but at the same time, I also am like, Andy's fine, but I'm always been more endeared to Kristen. She's one of our main protagonists. Andy, like, you know, he popped up a little here and there, and he was gone, and he wasn't going here, so we're not as attached to Andy as we are any other character, so any indiscretion, I know, it's me with my, got my feminist cap on, if you want to say, but it's just like, no, just in general, character-wise, like, I'm more endeared to Kristen, and once again, she was kind of going through some shit. To be fair, Andy was too. He's kind of not going through that shit anymore, because he's not being brainwashed anymore. Like, that was his own decision. Once again, I could be, hey, maybe, like I said, maybe I've got my Kristen cap on. I'm caping for Kristen really quickly, but maybe it's just, I just feel like she was going through like some shit at the time, like she was being like turned more evil at the time, but maybe I'm misremembering. But either way, like, Kristen like bailed and is like, cool, we're not going to talk again. You're not going to talk to your kids. What you're going to do is talk to my lawyer. And so when she got home, Ben was already there setting stuff like, I don't remember what he was there for exactly, but Kristen was breaking down and talked to him, and Lynn and Laura, not Lynn, it was Laura and Lila that were listening, and they heard everything about future Laura and everything. And so they went back and told Lexi and Lynn, and it's like, okay, so what's going on between you and Dad? It's like, oh my God, like Dad cheated on you, future me's the one that told you. It's like, wait, what did she, and Lila's like, what'd she say about me? It's like, I don't know. It's like, well, it's future you. Why didn't you say anything? And I love Lexi's like, does that mean Father Acosta is going to be our new dad? And it's like, no. And it's like, that's, I mean, understandable. Like, this is all hitting them so quickly. So obviously they're struggling to keep up with all of this. So now that, you know, and Ben ultimately ends up telling David, because she ended up telling Ben a lot, especially the whole like, oh yeah, David's going to leave the church in 6 months to be with me and going to move in here with me. And Ben's kind of like, huh, because he thinks that's all horse shit. But he ends up talking to David later about the whole them situation. Because he was like, oh, you should go over there and comfort her. And you could tell David had his reservations, like, with everything going on, should I really do that? And he does. Gets visited by that demon pretending to be Kristen, which I'm like, oh, that's so unfair. She's wearing, like, the school uniform, which is all kinds of effed up. Because Katya, the actress who plays Kristen, is so beautiful and sexy, and then you put her in a school uniform. Yes, I know it is the most cliche male fantasy, but it's a cliche for a reason, because it's sexy, dude. So I'm like, oh, that's so effed up, but I'm also like, I'm here for it. Oh God, which is so effed up because it's like she plays like the extra sexy and sensual Kristen when she's playing like this demon version of herself, which understandable. That's the purpose of it. And I love she's telling David like, oh, if she takes you to the office and she locks the door, that means she's wanting this to happen. So they end up going to the office. She didn't lock the door, but it's like, well, I can understand why you want to lock the door, because you don't want your kids just busting in while you're having this conversation with David. But it's kind of like, yeah, checking in. And she's like, right, I want you to hold me. And they hug for a very long time. And then she's just kind of like, yeah, you need to go. It's like, yeah, good thing. Because it's like, neither one of you wants to cross that line. But this ties into what I was bringing up earlier about him and Ben having an actual conversation. Because Ben's feeling what everyone's been feeling since like season 1. That's why I was always so surprised, like nothing ever happened. But it's like, to be fair, they started this series off with Kristen being married. Granted, Andy was out of the picture for a bit just because the whole mountain climbing element to it. But yeah, it's just, you kind of almost like were sad when Andy came back into the picture. Kristen kind of was too, because you're like, damn, like the whole, and her and David is like a will they, won't they, and just nothing. I mean, especially when Andy came back more permanently, you're like, well, it's definitely a no now. And it's like, Kristen's not going to want to, she wouldn't want to do that. David wouldn't want to do it. But now it's like, oh, like her and her husband are in a complicated spot right now, which I'm sure for David, that's also an effed up thing of like, I don't want to jump into this no matter how much I do love Kristen and she loves me. Like, I don't want to do that. It feels home wrecky and stuff like that. And it's like, it feels like I'm taking, because I'm sure it also feels like you're taking advantage of someone you care about in one of their most like tumultuous times, because it's like, it's one thing after another. It's like, you found out your husband, well, first and foremost, your mom died, you got custody of your son, you've also found out your husband's cheating. It's like when it rains, it pours in Kristen's life, and that just happens even more throughout the episode, which we'll get to in a second. But he doesn't want to jump onto that bandwagon because, well, he's also figuring stuff out because he got promoted to being a pastor because Ignatius is like, yeah, I'm retiring. But David doesn't see this as a good thing, becoming a pastor, David, because he's like, oh, no. They're promoting someone like me, a black man, in this position because shit's about to go down, and that's the only reason why, because there's no more power to hand out. So why not? Like, it's a false flag of like promoting him. And it turns out David was right. The lawyer shows up and is like, yeah, the parish doesn't have any money, so they're ending the assessment situation. It's like, well, can't we transfer it over? He's like, oh no, like the diocese is like, no. It's like they specifically said to David, or at least told Ignatius to tell David, they want him to stay on doing the assessments and doing the whole thing as a pastor. And it's like, well, that was bullshit, just so he wouldn't get on and know that something was off. So it was a false sense of security type of situation I think they kind of had going on there. But either way, now Ben and Kristen are out of a job, and it's like, cool, the worst time for her to not have a job, like just lost her job security, and because they're like the job is officially done in like a month. Like they have still like a month, like they can still do stuff, but other than that, it's just going to be like, nah, we're done. So I was like, that's harsh. And so David doesn't want to tell Kristen yet because once again, she's just got so many plates spinning already. But then Ben brings up the whole like, right, you guys are meant to be together, so why won't you why are you doing this whole priest thing? And for him, David had like, I think this is the first time David's ever been so really open and honest about it and passionately answering this question of, he's like, this world is filled with so much evil and just terrible shit. This world's filled with so many broken promises. The fact of the matter is, he's like, I could scroll on the internet for 5 minutes and I just want to put my fist through the screen just because that's just all the evil in the world. And it's just like, to kind of bring some balance, I guess, to himself. It's just, right, there has to be at least one promise in this world that can be kept. And he's like, I made my promise to God, and that's foundational to me against fighting evil. And it's just like, I need to be able to keep this one promise no matter how much it messes me up, and no matter how much I need Kristen. And Ben didn't really have much of a response to that because he's like, he gets that. It's like, you had like, for him too, I think it was a thing of he needed to latch on to this promise, not just for his sanity of just like, you know, because he had that conversation previously with, what was it, episode 9, about like, right, the church and stuff is fine with the world being weird. It's just everyone else who looks at things from a scientific perspective wants things to kind of fit in a certain box and fit a certain narrative. And it's like, we as from the church, we accept the crazy. We know the crazy is the normal, you know? So I think there's a little bit of just trying to make sense of it all by, you know, choosing to keep this one promise, and that promise being to God, no matter how much it hurts. So that's the real complicated rub of it all. Then later on, you had Ellie show up. It was specifically Laura that ends up interacting with her, being like, oh yeah, you're supposed to be future me. And I'm like, because once again, this is the beauty of the show. You never know, like, is there some truth to this? Like, especially because this season has been a little more science fiction-y. So I was like, is this going to be some bullshit or what? I figured I was like, there has to be some explanation for it. But I'm like, some of the stuff she's saying is kind of wild that I'm like, how does she know what she knows? She knows that Laura had like a surgery. Also knowing that Andy tried to kill her some time ago. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it could still be some like DFBS because they know a lot more about like Kristen and her family. So wasn't sure. But like Laura did a smart thing of like, oh, let me go out here while she's using the bathroom and take a picture of her license plate, and it comes in handy. But then it's like, well, they looked into it. It was stolen like 3 days ago. She had left a gift for the baby, and you're like, okay, what? And she wants to talk to Lexi specifically, which we know Lexi's got the whole like thing going on. We're like, all right, there's something there with Lexi. So it's like, there might not be. I didn't know she's trying to warn Lexi because she was specifically using a timetable of like, yeah, something's going to come up in 20 years. And you're like, what the hell is, what's going to happen? But like that's once again the rub of it all, because we know there is something going on with Lexi, and so you're like, there might be truth to this. Because if this was DF, like, would they even like compromise the thing that they have happening in the background? Would they compromise that just for this? Like, what gain would they get from sacrificing whatever role like Lexi would play in the long run? So that's what I was so confused by. So it turns out the gift that she left, it had a very specific smell. It's a good thing Kristen didn't let Lila touch it like she wanted to. The science people that Ben is kind of connected with, like his sister, like ended up like running stuff through them, and it turns out it's like some nerve agent or something that you'd see in war. So it's like, okay, so who would try and kill a baby? He's like, well, we know that the baby, Timothy, is the Antichrist. So Lynn happened to be home, like, you know, downstairs. I thought when the device activated, she was going to recognize, like, oh my god, I thought she was going to come in while her mom was like dealing with her quote-unquote paralysis demon. I thought that's what was going to happen, but no, she went outside following a ghost and was like, oh, you're going to follow me to hell. And then she turns around and Ellie's there, and Ellie's like, cool, when your brother's 23 and your sister's 35, she's going to protect him, put him in powerful positions so they could lead people, being like, yeah, she's the guardian of the Antichrist. Don't stand in my way. She's got a box cutter, makes her way up. I'm like, what the fuck? I was like, is this really some Terminator shit about to go down? So I was like, I just don't know. And luckily, Laura like woke up. It's like, sounded off the horn just before she could hurt Timothy. And I think that was enough to kind of snap Kristen out of it, and she was able to kind of get up and attack Ellie. But Ben came over and Ellie escaped, and they're like, okay. But the moment I was like, okay, so where's this going to go? I was like, because at first I was like, are we going to do the mysterious thing of like she disappeared or whatever? Because like before she was able to attack Timothy, Laura's like, hey, if you're supposed to be me from the future, what's going to happen if you attack me? And I think in their state, she ended up like kind of thinking about like the time-space continuum of it all. But yeah. I'm like, I thought the twist would be like, oh, they turn around and she disappeared and you never really know the truth. It's like, no, the truth ended up being more salacious and more interesting than I thought it was going to be. I think it actually is more interesting at not being a science fictional time travel thing. And it's like, oh no, she's a crazy lady. Like, all right, let's not use the word crazy. Mentally disturbed human being. Because it turns out she stole the car from the same facility that Andy was in. I was like, motherfucker, it's the woman he's sleeping with. Because I was thinking that early on. I was like, well, they made sure to show her early on wearing a mask. I wonder is that the same actress or not. I was actually kind of like thrown for a loop for a second when they showed her boobs. I was like, oh shit. I was like, whoa. I was like, once again, I kind of, for whatever reason, because I always have to remind myself, I was like, well, this is on Paramount Plus. It's not on CBS anymore. It hasn't been on CBS since like 2019, but I still kind of throw me for a loop when I see what the show is able to get away with. But either way, they went out of their way not to show her identity. And also, Andy just said like, oh yeah, she's the person like from across the hall. But in her rage, like obviously Kristen didn't care enough to find out who she was because it didn't matter. It's like some random hookup, but just the woman that just happened to be across the hall. Like, did you really have a special connection, whatever? Ends up showing up there. Andy's already gone. Apparently, him and Ellie left like earlier this morning or something like that. I was like, wow. You'll never know. This crazy lady tried to. Once again, it wasn't your kid. So I don't think you're going to be but it's still a thing of it's still Kristen's son, so that's kind of effed up. He'll probably never know that she was doing that. So it's like, cool, that lady's not right in the head, but once again, he's like, I'm not right in the head, she's not right in the head. We make quite the odd couple. Well, perfect pair would be more appropriate than saying odd couple. So, and we find the flash drive of what Andy got from Cheryl, and that's what she was watching over and over and over. So now you're like, okay. So she got a lot of these details from Andy because like Andy probably talked about the kids a lot. So he probably had some ideas of what, some of that was probably like what the future holds. That's probably bullshit she made up and just, she filled in that narrative. It's the future. You can make up whatever the fuck you want to. But she was so caught up in the delusion of believing she was Laura from the future, like she started believing it. So that's why she stopped when Laura's like, hey, what if you kill me, what's going to happen to you? Which is like, right, she stopped because she is mentally disturbed and she legitimately began to believe herself to be, I guess because she just like became so obsessed with it and it became her identity that she really believed this situation. So I wonder, does she slip in and out of that lucidity sometimes or what, for her to have the know-how to like, not know-how, but the wherewithal to leave with Andy afterwards kind of showcases like, if you were really his daughter, you wouldn't be hooking up with your dad, would you? I don't know. So it makes you wonder, like, what's the line between she was just batshit crazy, which, once again, mentally disturbed, or just, like, not unless she was a plant to push Andy down this darker path. Like, she, like, it was purpose of getting closer to his family. I don't know. She might have just been doing that all on her own, but because Cheryl in the video brings up the whole thing about Timothy and Lexi, but that's about it. Once again, I figured, I brought it up last episode, I was like, I knew, like, most likely Andy's video was going to be different from Kristen's video, so that was some interesting development. So you're like, cool. Also, David kind of had to reluctantly tell Kristen the truth about like, yeah, you're kind of out of a job, and she's like, cool. And once again, it's like, want to throw anything else at me, universe? It's like, yeah, the universe has kind of screwed her over. So I don't know what to make of the fact is that she kind of ignored like some of the stuff Cheryl was saying in her video, because she's like, well, my mom was trying to do what she's trying to do, but also she's kind of like, probably a little batshit crazy is probably what she's interpreting, because like after all that Lexi and Timothy stuff came up, she shut down the computer and just went back to kind of like rocking Timothy singing "You Are My Sunshine." So I don't know what to make of it. Once again, it still plays into what they wanted, was for her to nurture the evil inside of Timothy. So who knows if this is still playing the way they wanted it to. It's interesting too, because like she had the conversation with David earlier in the episode about, can you really just accept Jesus and to be accepted into heaven, all is forgiven? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, really? Like, no matter what terrible thing you do, you murder someone, but as long as you say like, hey, I accept Jesus, Jesus is God, I'm good. And he's like, it's a little more complicated than that, because I think you legitimately do have to, like, God will forgive you if you are like penitent about it, like if you are legitimately sorry. And once again, I kind of look at it, and an example I always talk about is Lucifer. Once again, in that show, it's like, right, the only person keeping you in hell is yourself. Lucifer doesn't keep you in hell. It's your own guilt that keeps you there. As long as you stop getting rid of your guilt, once you're able to get rid of your guilt, then you're able to go to heaven, which we saw that was the case. So it's that type of situation that I'm like, I kind of have that view on it now, which I think is kind of an interesting view to have on hell and heaven and stuff like that, but who knows? So that is one side of the episode. Another side of things in the long run ends up being Leland's circumstances. So I was like, oh, are there actually any bodies there? And it's like, yeah, it turns out there were bodies there, because that plays a whole role in Leland's court case, because it's no longer just kidnapping, because they add murder charges to it, because the two people's bodies they found later died. So it's like, cool. So he's in court. I love the whole thing, him being in prison, him being miserable. He tried to remote view / control, but the moment he did, he started hearing the music that's, kind of his trigger. And I guess, like, I don't know whether it's like, I don't know who he would, like, I don't know if it's like a thing of specifically he was trying to enter David in that moment, and that's what happens because now it's associated with that, or is it now that his mind has been opened anytime he takes that step past the kind of metaphysical door that is that ability, that the door is blocked by that trauma and everything, that will always be front and center the moment he opens that door, crosses that line now. So I guess that permanently shuts and protects David from ever being controlled. I guess that's how that works now. Proceeded to get knocked out. I love his lawyer. That actor, I was like, probably the most recent thing I saw him in was, because I have seen that actor in a few things, but the thing that probably most recent would be like Big Sky. I can't remember his character's name from Big Sky, but because he technically played two characters, spoilers. But yeah, he was in Big Sky's part of the most recent thing I'd seen him in. I feel like there was something more recent I'd seen him in, but either way, I love that he's kind of his disheveled lawyer. It's like, really? Is this the best DF could send my way? It's like, yeah. But yeah, all that stuff getting labeled against Leland, it's like, okay, he wants a new lawyer, but his lawyer's like, all right. All you have to do is basically get diagnosed as insane. We'll put you at a facility. You'll be there about a week. You'll be there for a little bit. We'll prescribe some medication, and then you'll be out. So that's all you have to do. So they brought in Kurt to be the one that diagnosed him, because he's like, hey, Kurt owes me a favor. And so Kurt has to kind of play along, and he's like, all right. He's initially just handling it fairly, but being like, all right, let me assess you. He's like, well, I am really the devil. I'm possessed by the devil. I helped the 60 come. And he's like, oh, what's the 60? He's like, well, the one bring about the end of the world, yada, yada, yada. All the evil shit he's done and been a part of that he's now pretending is like, oh, his delusions and stuff, just for the purposes of, I need to seem clinically insane. And Kurt initially doesn't want to like play into this, but he had to go like, let me remind you, I could take everything away from you, your book, your success, and also your life. So in that particular order, I think it was kind of what he was saying. So by the time he actually does get to court, which I should also know, I love that Richard, because I heard the voice, I was like, is that Richard Kind? And sure as hell was Richard Kind. He's the judge. It's funny because obviously this episode came out probably beforehand, but most recently I heard him, he was voicing a character in the Kite Man Hell Yeah animated series, so that's I was like, oh, Richard Kind. But yeah, like his lawyer, I guess, is no longer his lawyer anymore. Like I guess, well, as I almost wanted, Jesus, I guess because I got lost on a mind, I was about to call him Ben. Leland called him like you're the evil that's supposed to come to New York. He's wearing his lawyer as a skin suit and comes in and he's kind of walking sluggish because the demon's actually dragging like 3 carcasses behind him. I was like, Jesus. And he's just like, yeah, you don't want to do this. You want to keep me as your lawyer and we're going to like handle this like what we were supposed to, because he was trying to switch up lawyers and kind of handle a different strategy. But it's like, nah, you're going to keep me as your lawyer. Do not fuck up again or fuck with us again or fuck with all this or you are going to be fucked. So that is where things currently stand on Leland's legal struggles and legal circumstances. So it's going to be so interesting to see what the hell all this means going forward into the next episode. I'm so curious. I'm sure that's going to be a continuous thread, but I'm so curious to see like how's the story going to end for Leland? What's next for Kristen and the family? Like in general, like the show is coming to an end, and now also the assessments are coming to an end. All that future Laura stuff was bullshit, but it's like there might be some truth to it. Like it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy where David might actually leave the church for her, but maybe not. Maybe that is all. I mean, it definitely was all bullshit, because I'm sure Andy was spouting stuff about how he thinks David is in love with Kristen, and Kristen's like, that's probably where Ellie got a lot of that stuff from. Once again, Andy was just running his mouth while they were cuddling. So like I said, either way, I'm so excited to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.